Chris Hansen here. Welcome to another special live edition of Takedown here in True Blue Studios. Normally, my co-host, Gabrielle Hansen, who is also my wife and True Blue producer, would be here to help out with the show, but she's on assignment tonight. She will join us for sure on the next episode. But as always, Sean Reck, my co-founder and president of True Blue, is here, and he'll be joining us in just a moment. But we want to start the show. There's Sean right there. He's got one of the new orange True Blue t-shirts on. Yep. And as we've seen recently on the Ralph Lauren commercials, orange is very popular. But before we get into all that, we have a very special guest. Sylvia Colon is with me, who represents Cleveland Missing. Sylvia, if you don't already know, is the aunt of Gina DeJesus, who was one of 3 women kept captive by a guy named Ariel Castro, released just, what, about 10 years ago?
Yeah, it was 10 years ago this past Saturday.
It's amazing that's been so long. And the torture that these young women went through is only aided and somewhat soothed by what you're doing now with Cleveland Missing. Tell me about the mission in terms of being the liaison between the families of missing people and law enforcement.
Sure. So Cleveland Family Center, it's actually the official, we call it Cleveland Missing, but it's actually the Cleveland Family Center for Missing Children and Adults. It was really founded on the premise that there was a family of a 14-year-old girl that had been missing for 9 years. That young woman just happened to be Gina DeJesus.
Your niece.
She's actually my cousin, but everybody says she's my niece, so we'll go with that. But Gina, however, when she came home, she started asking a lot of questions. She had seen TV for 9 years when she was held captive, so she asked a lot of questions like, well, what did you guys go through? What kind of help did you have? And she slowly learned that our family didn't have any help because there was really no organization available to my family, kind of a one-stop shop. And so as Gina felt more comfortable being back home and talking about the missing, she decided that we needed to do something. And together we pulled our brains together and thought we probably should have something for families, because there's so many organizations out there that help look for missing people. But what about the families? And the families are also victims. And so we decided we were going to actually have a bricks and mortar building for families to come to. And our mission is really simple. One, we want to make sure that we are there for families through the beginning of when somebody goes missing up until the very end when they're recovered, hopefully. And then we provide services to them and link them to other services in the community once the person comes home.
What does it say that your organization continues to be so busy in dealing with the problem of missing people?
Yeah, it's been really crazy. In 2022, we had 58 cases and 11 inquiries. And quite frankly, not just in Northeast Ohio, but we've had people all over the country and one person in Ireland reach out to us for support. And we've been getting calls every day now, every single day. In fact, I received a call this morning at 1:30 in the morning for a missing person.
1:30 this morning?
1:30 this morning. Mm-hmm.
And what are you able to do to help these people, these families?
Well, the first thing we do is make sure that they've made a police report, because you would be surprised when somebody goes missing. Many people don't even know that that's the first step they should do. So we walk them through that. If they haven't made a police report, this is what it looks like. Who did you talk to? You want to document it, get the police ID number in terms of the report, and we'll go from there. Then we help them make flyers. The family that I got the call from at 1:30 this morning actually had a flyer made with the father's phone number. And I said, no, we can't post that. Let me make a new one. We'll do it together, but we really need to put the law enforcement investigation number on there so that any tip can be given to that law enforcement agency. And then we just provide support. They may need counseling. They may need to just come in and use our computers, make more flyers. We help them navigate social media and then the media locally and what that looks like. And then we just help them understand not everybody is your friend, so be careful who you share information with.
Well, exactly. And Gabrielle and I and Sean Reck have had the pleasure of being a part of your organization, and we appreciate it very much. And one of the things we like most about these live shows is it gives our audience, our viewers, our followers a chance to interact with us. And And the last time we did this show, we took a lot of questions from YouTube, not even realizing that people from all over the world will contribute to our YouTube channel in order to get a question popped up to the top of the list. And so during our last broadcast, we actually got a lot of donations, which we have put together to give to you on behalf of our viewers. So
this is wonderful.
That's a little
Thank you.
token of our appreciation from our viewers, True Blue viewers, to Cleveland Missing. So I hope it is
This
helpful.
is so wonderful, and every penny that we get goes back in to the foundation and helping families, because we really are a very small, new organization, and every penny that we raise is just like this. We have to do fundraisers, and by the kindness of people like your viewers.
Well, we appreciate it. People who are watching tonight who want to ask questions should also know that everyone who donates to have a question answered or read here, that money will go to Cleveland Missing, all of it.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
And Sylvia, thank you very much for being on the show with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Let's switch over to Sean Reck, who's in the studio next to me. Sean, you've got some information for our True Blue subscribers and loyal people. And we're just, I should also say that we're overwhelmed by the support that you all have shown True Blue. And we're not only putting out these new Takedown episodes, we've got something like 36 new ones on the Predator investigations, but we've got a number of other really compelling documentaries in the works, in editing, that'll be out very soon. So, Sean?
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is thank you so much to all those who subscribe to the actual streaming network. A lot of people are YouTube subscribers, and we appreciate you too. I want you to know that YouTube, at best, limits the monetization of the episodes that we put up for free. We don't make much off of them. We only get paid for the subscribers who watch, the people who buy a YouTube Red plan like me. So it's important for you to know that these aren't largely monetized. A big question that we got in the Q&A today is what happened to the doctor episode? What happened to the pervy doctor who grabbed the behind of a decoy? They actually age restricted it, which meant that you had to be registered and pay to even watch the video. And at that point, the views went from 50,000 a day to 1,000 a day. And that's when we have to take it down and just leave it on the streaming service. So what you see on YouTube, the 5 or 6 full episodes, that's 1/6 of what you'll see on the streaming service for less than $5. And we release a new episode every week. YouTube could never support the costs of doing these episodes. So those of you who really appreciate this, if there's any way you could subscribe to watch True Blue, we would really, really appreciate it. I also want you to know that we promised everybody whose questions we asked a shirt last episode. And I found out after the episode that we were out of shirts. So we just ordered a ton of shirts, and they came in. And we also added a couple new colors just to not just have gray, black, and white. So you can see that we actually have the orange shirts now, and we have kind of a safety yellow-green shirt in case you want to wear it when you're directing traffic. But we've got all sizes. We're gonna have a True Blue store opening up here within a week. The web address, right now it'll just go to the streamer. It's trubluswag.com. But in about a week, it'll be a Shopify store where you can order a shirt. Everybody who is a member of WatchTrueBlue.com, that's about 10,000 people, they're all going to get a coupon for $5 off automatically. That's going to be sent to you. Anybody who asks a question and we use it is going to get a coupon for $35 off, which will get you a shirt, shipping, everything. You won't have to pay a dime. So put in those questions. If you pay for a question and help Cleveland Missing, there's a lot stronger chance that we'll read it so that we can help that organization. So keep your eye out for the store. The shirts all came in today, and they're in stock, and we're going to start shipping in a few days when the store goes live. So thank you for your support. We don't make much on the shirts. It's really more about walking around with them and people saying, what the heck is True Blue? And tell them what it's about. Tell them about Catch a Predator. On YouTube, those Catch a Predator videos have billions of views, but a lot of people don't know that the show is back in this form. So we really appreciate your support, both YouTubers and people who join Watch True Blue. The other thing about Watch True Blue, you don't have to do it on the web. There are multiple platforms. You could do Watch True Blue on iOS, on Apple TV, on pretty soon Samsung TV, on Fire Stick, on Roku. You can watch using your favorite methods. So again, we appreciate you, and I'm going to throw it back to Chris.
Thank you, Sean. One of the reasons I like doing these live shows is because we get to take a deeper dive into the individual predators that we expose in these investigations. And as you know, we work closely with law enforcement so that we do have integrity when these cases get prosecuted, and there's a sense of security around the investigation. But I never completely get used to coming face to face with these various predators. And so this show is an opportunity to take a look at some of the more recent cases and to help me break these individuals down and to understand the profile of a predator and to better protect many of you from becoming victims of predators and to help educate our children in our society. I have with us Dr. Rachel Lovell, who's the director of the Criminology Center, Research Center at Cleveland State University. And Rachel, thank you so much for being here with us. You have a unusually intimate experience with predatory crimes because of the cases you study, and give me a sense for how you got into this. And I want you then to take a look at some of what we found, and we're going to dig into the mind of a predator a little bit here.
Okay. Sure. So I started working with the Cuyahoga County Prosecutor's Office. Cuyahoga County is Cleveland, Ohio, when they started testing their backlogged rape kits. So a rape kit is a set of items used by medical professionals or collected by medical professionals to collect evidence from a victim of sexual assault. And so if a victim reports and goes to the hospital, they collect evidence, they put it into a kit, or a rape, sometimes called rape kit. So I started working with the prosecutor's office when they started following up on the testing of all of these rape kits. And now, nationally, 2/3 of the U.S. population is under some aspect of a sexual assault kit initiative site where they are working to address backlog rape kits. So that gave me the opportunity to really study decades worth of sexual offending that was undetected, which is really what researchers have been wanting to do for quite some time. We know about the convicted cases, but what about all the other cases that they may have committed that they weren't convicted for? Because convictions are the exception rather than the rule in sexual assault cases, and in particular for rape. So it gave us an opportunity to really explore these in ways we hadn't been able to see and really understand more about their offending behaviors.
Almost without exception, the predators who surface in our investigations try to convince me it's their first time. They've never done this before, and then come the excuses. I know they're not all the same guy. They fit different profiles, but if you had to categorize the human being who would get online, meet a child for sex, and commit these kinds of crimes, who are these guys?
I'm not a psychologist, but psychologists have found that there are certain, again, not every sexual predator is exactly the same, but there are certain characteristics of their psychology that is unique to sexual offenders, or at least more prevalent in sexual offenders. One of the main ones that I think you will see is a lack of empathy for somebody else. And so they really cannot feel what other people feel or put themselves as much in the mind of the person that they're victimizing. They really don't think about somebody else in that sort of way. They also have aspects of impulse control and lack of emotional intelligence. But really what it is they seize opportunities to exploit vulnerabilities in victims. And so they really seek out vulnerabilities. They seek out the vulnerable, whatever that means for them. So in this case, it could be they may not have access to children in their everyday life, but the internet provides them access to children. or to young women or boys in a way that they won't in their normal day life. So they exploit that vulnerability without really thinking about what would it be like. That's why I think sometimes it's shocking that we can say, but you have 2 daughters and you're trying to do this to this, right? They're not thinking about that other person. They think this is what I want and I'm entitled to this. I'm not thinking about what the other person might be going through.
In so many cases, I look at these guys and say, do you have kids of your own? And the answer is often yes. I have a daughter who, in some cases, is the same age as the child he thinks he's coming to meet to sexually assault.
Yes. Yes, it's not that uncommon to be able to do that. As well as there's some really interesting research to say that, for example, murderers are a lot more remorseful and are much more willing to accept responsibility for their behavior than rapists will. And so rapists very rarely accept responsibility. They usually deflect and blame the victim in much more profound ways than you will see with others. And they often don't admit to other types of sexual offenses, saying it's their first time. Oh, it must, I've had sex with thousands of women. How can I possibly remember that one victim? She was asking for it, those kinds of things.
I have so many questions for you, and I know our viewers do as well, but I want to take a look at some of the clips. And each one of these cases is shocking in its own way, but one that stands out is the one we refer to as Fanboy. And we have an update on that case that I'll get to in just a minute. But Matthew Bongine was arrested in Polk County, Florida. And this is the guy who was in Florida from California on business, essentially. And he gets online and tries to set up a meeting with a mother and her young daughter. Take a look at the clip. But do you see what I'm saying? I mean, help me to understand. Everybody asks me all the time, who are these guys that show up in your investigations? And I try to explain it the best I can. But here's a situation where you're a professional. You have a good job. You're in town getting training for that job.
Yes.
And yet now you're in one of my investigations.
Yes.
How does that happen, Matt?
Lapse in judgment.
A lapse in judgment. Has this been a fantasy of yours for some time?
Yes.
And where does that come from?
You make excuses. I'm not laughing at.
I know it's an anxious situation. I'm not forgiving it by any stretch, but I understand that you're...
When you psychoanalyze yourself, let's say, there's many factors that leads into the fact that nerd in high school, virgin until I was 20, did I miss out on something? And then that builds up in the back of your head and then leads to this.
Leads to this. Nerd in high school, virgin until I was 20. How can somebody possibly use that as justification to meet up with a 12-year-old girl?
Right. When I saw that the first time, it's really, right, he centered himself completely in that, right? And he talked about the entitlement that he would have, that because I was a nerd, because I was a virgin until I was later, that somehow that he's entitled to make that up or get that from somebody else, even if that means exploiting a child, taking it from somebody without a lack of consent and other sorts of things. So in that case, it's really like a sense of entitlement that this is what this is what I want. And there is aspects of motivation and sexual proclivities, but it's not just about, like, rape isn't about sex, right? It's about power and domination and exploitation. So in that case, like, he could have picked somebody to have sex with that was a consenting age. He could have paid to have sex with someone who was illegally, but still who was a consenting an adult. But instead he chose someone, a vulnerable individual, and in this case a child. So in criminology, one of the basic premise of that in victimology, the study of being a victim of crime, is that actually the motivations for the offender are less important. You just assume that someone is motivated, and once an opportunity presents itself or they organize something to get an opportunity, then that's when they will exploit that vulnerability. If there's what's called lack of capable guardianship, if there isn't someone watching, or a child is, vulnerable in multiple ways, and so there isn't guardianship to sort of help protect that child, then exploitation will occur, rapes will occur, those sorts of things.
His fantasy appears to be related to a mother-daughter scenario, a mother who's providing the daughter. It's hard to get your arms around that.
Yeah. I've read some of the most disgusting in my research, some of the, thousands of rapes, and it's still, after nearly a decade of doing this, it's still, it never ceases to amaze me that I can still be surprised in a bad way, right? That you will see these sorts of things where you're like, how can this happen, right? And I think it's often because people have not taken it as seriously, and shows like yours really put the spotlight back on the perpetrator instead of the victim, and saying, well, shouldn't the girl have known better? Shouldn't the parents have known better? All these sorts of scenarios, because we want to believe that that wouldn't happen to me, that wouldn't happen to my child. But instead, we need to put the responsibility back onto the perpetrators and say, you are responsible for your own behavior, regardless of when you first had sex, and regardless of whether you were a nerd in high school. Guess what? A lot of people were nerds, and they didn't end up being rapists. So really putting that spotlight back onto them, I think, is the important component of your show.
This particular individual in the chat with the decoy from the Polk County, Florida Sheriff's Department brings up the possibility that this is a Chris Hansen sting. I mean, he had seen the shows. Obviously, that's why we called him Fanboy.
Right.
He ultimately talked to me after telling the detectives to go pound sand, but he was sort of enamored with the fact that he was going to be on television. Again, it's stunning to me.
Yeah, that there's something that says, like they shouldn't do it that, like they shouldn't be doing this. There's something about it that doesn't maybe sit right with them, or they're worried at least of getting caught. But a lot of rapists, actually, we think that they try to hide, and a lot of what you will see is that they're actually, they care more about the act of committing the rape or the sexual assault or the sexual exploitation more than they care about not getting caught, or at least they can't get over that. And so they'll plan out the first part really well often, right? Like you'll see in the same, right? And then have no plan whatsoever for what happens after that, how they don't get caught, how they, release the victim, all those sorts of things. There isn't a plan because they're so enamored with that first part.
Are these guys just gambling with odds that it won't be authorities, it won't be one of our investigations?
Yeah, I think statistically they're probably playing some kind of odds. And, most of these sexual offenders, as you see, they're very rational in their behavior. While they may have impulses, they're still very rational. It takes a long time to set something up. They had many times to say no, right? I think in one of the clips someone was saying, like, I thought about not coming. I thought about doing this. I was worried it was Chris Hansen. Like, they have these, like, stops in that, but still have that rational thing of, like, but this is what I want to do, and I'm making this rational decision to do that. They're not just, like, completely irrational in their behavior or just completely driven by emotions or impulses.
This particular individual, Matthew Bongine, has now pleaded no contest to charges associated with the sting, and he's facing 4 years in prison. His sentence is 4 years in prison, so he'll have plenty of time to think about his actions on that. Sean is standing by with the questions and in contact with those of you who are watching tonight. Sean, what do you have?
Yeah, Chris, Matthew Bongine was in fact sentenced to 4 years, and that's heartening because we don't always see strong sentences in these cases. I'm going to get into a few paid questions.
Sure.
I think I know the answer to this because this in Michigan. It's kind of the same approach when somebody's 18. But Eric Borgerson paid $5. Thank you for donating that to Cleveland Missing. Whatever happened to the 18-year-old Sean from Michigan that was caught at the hotel sting?
Sean was a case of a young man in Michigan who showed up to meet a teenage girl, a 15-year-old girl, and he was prosecuted, but ultimately a plea bargain was reached with the Shiawassee County prosecutor where he would seek treatment, and if he successfully completed that treatment, he would then not face those charges because it was believed to be his first offense. Now, the chat was very graphic. He arrived with what he described himself as a butt plug. He was a babysitter. He obviously presented a danger to children, yet, you know, it's one of those cases where, at least in the eyes of the court and the prosecutor, that he deserved a second chance. But really, what's the difference, Doctor, between the danger posed by an 18-year-old and a danger posed by a 38-year-old?
So there is some research to suggest that when juvenile sex offenders, if they get treatment early enough, if there's screening mechanisms and they get treatment early enough, that there is greater chances for the treatment to be improved or help them. But for individuals which younger does not mean 18, right? So
Right.
It's like 12, 13, 14, 15 when that behavior presents. Once you get older, treatment is much more difficult. And in this case, like, while he's 18 and some would say 15, you know, like that's a sort of, they call them Romeo and Juliet laws, right? But he shows then a pattern, a consistency, because he talks about, right, like he had a prior for that.
That's not the case for the prior. This particular one did not have a prior. We're going to talk about one who did in just a little bit.
But, you know, like if they're, you know, just because someone got caught for something doesn't mean that's their first case. But in the eyes of the court has to consider if it's the first time you got caught for that offense. But he didn't try to pick up someone his own age, right? He tried to pick up someone he knew to be well under the age of consent, which I'm not sure in Michigan. I guess it's probably less than 16,
Yep.
Same in Ohio. So, you know, he knew the law, and he purposely tried to still, you know, have sex with someone he knew to be under the age.
Okay. Sean?
A couple more questions. Back up here. I'm hesitant to ask this, but I don't want to be on the news, but how often do fans come up to you and quote Predators from the show?
Well, that happens a lot, actually. You know, one of the things about the Predator franchise is that it's become somewhat iconic in pop culture. And people do that all the time on social media. And I'm okay with that because I think it continues to bring attention to a very important topic. And I think the more we discuss this and more we create a dialogue and awareness, I think the better off we all are, which is one of the reasons why I'm so appreciative, Doctor, of you being on the show. There's another clip that you've taken a look at, and I want to get your thoughts on it. We had a case recently during our investigation in Ohio, in Montgomery County, not far from here. And in a matter of 2 days, 6 guys surfaced in this investigation, including a 70-year-old man who drove all the way from Indiana, who has children of his own, including an adopted daughter. And there's some investigating going on there in terms of his behavior in his own home. But he shows up after a sexually charged conversation involving a father and his 13-year-old daughter. And the conversation basically is that he wants to have sex with the girl, the 70-year-old, Donnie, and then he wants to watch the father have sex with the girl, which is shocking. Now, when you see the transcripts, you don't always know that these guys are going to show up. And so sometimes these guys are just living out a fantasy online. But in this case, Donnie drove all the way from Indiana to the Sting House in Ohio, and he walks in, and it was stunning to everybody in that house. He walks in, and the deputy plays the role of the 13-year-old girl. The detective plays the role of the dad. And Donnie sits down on the couch, and he's ogling the girl. And he brings her a milkshake. And they have the conversation, and he says something to the effect of, it's good that you're teaching her because boys her age don't know how to properly have sex with a girl. Take a look at the clip, and then I want to get your take on it.
This is something you're wanting to do.
She'll do whatever.
She'll be great.
Yeah, I just do what I'm told.
Daddy's girl, huh?
Absolutely.
That's a
She
wonderful
is.
thing.
We want to make sure she's safe.
She is.
When's the last time you had sex with a young girl?
With a young girl?
Yeah,
2 or 3 years ago.
2 or 3 years ago. And when's the last time you met a girl online and then went to go have sex with her?
Probably 2 or 3 years ago.
2 or 3 years ago.
My last wife and I got a divorce after 20 years. Basically, it was a sexless marriage. When we got married, I know that one of the people actually thought I had what was called a love disorder.
A love disorder.
Is that something you know of, or
I've never heard it
love
put that way.
addiction?
Love addiction?
Yeah.
Sex addiction, I've heard of.
Well, they said it wasn't really a sex addiction, but it's that you wanted to be needed.
You want to be needed. But you can be needed with somebody who's of legal age, Donnie.
Well, I agree.
Now, he sat there and talked to me for quite some time. A love addiction.
I'm not a psychologist. I have heard of that.
But you're a criminologist.
But I'm a criminologist. So as a criminologist, I saw different patterns in that, right? So he's talking about his wife. He's bringing it back to sex or his sexless marriage. But he's not having sex with someone who's near or around his age or in a relationship that would be similar to a marriage or any aspect of that, right? He's talking about watching a dad have sex with his own 13-year-old daughter. I mean, it wasn't, but that's what he wanted, his own 13-year-old daughter, right? So again, not taking responsibility for their own actions and behaviors, deflecting, making excuses for those types of things. And instead of what I think they don't really want to say, which is, I'm a monster, right? That would do this, and not only think about it, talk about it, but really try to put that into play where it would actually play out in a real life situation. And he even admits to doing that with other girls. So how many other 13-year-old victims are out there, victims who are more vulnerable, who are more easily exploited? And somehow, he doesn't at all include or talk about the victim, right? Doesn't talk about what they may be going through, right? It's just very self-centered in their approach to that. We also see that sexual offenders, in terms of criminology, tend to continue to offend much later in their life than most individuals will age out, or a lot of individuals will age out of criminal behavior, of stealing cars or breaking and entering, drugs, those sorts of things. They retire. Sex offenders tend to go much later into their lives in sex offending, until the point where they're either stopped or it gets too difficult, or they aren't able to rape or exploit physically, or they can't get away to be able to do it in the same sort of way. So here, he's talking about not being married. So, sometimes when you have wife and kids or other sorts of things, there's someone checking on you, knowing where you're going, or you travel for work, and then like the one individual was traveling for work to do that. So you do see that later in life. So the fact that he's 70 isn't all that surprising. We see individuals in our database, the oldest one is 89 years old, and that's his first known rape that we know about, but he's 89, right? So, and the youngest is 11. So there is a much larger range, and they will continue to sexually assault for longer periods of time.
He reveals a number of things during both my interview with him and his interview with detectives. One of the things was he had a daughter around the age of 20 at home who had emotional and intellectual issues. She was adopted, and he was anxious to get back home to her because she couldn't be alone. His estranged wife, who had the ability to check on her, was at work. It bothered authorities that there was this young woman at home who might have been in a vulnerable situation. As a criminologist, does that make the hair on the back of your neck stick up? Yeah,
certainly. I think traditionally sexual assaults and other types of sex crime cases have been really decided very early on at turn of just that one victim. And they make the case about how strong it is based upon what the victim says, what the victim remembers, how much evidence is there. Increasingly, with more training, law enforcement is moving more towards what they call course of conduct types of investigations, where they're really looking at someone's entire life or their different types of relationships to say, well, he might also want to have sex with a 13-year-old, but that doesn't preclude him from also exploiting perhaps somebody else who's vulnerable in his life, who he has access to, which could also be his daughter. So one of the main things that we're finding in our research and publishing about through the sexual assault kits is just how diverse some of these individuals are in their victim type, victim preference, other types of things. We have this idea that someone who rapes kids only rapes kids. Someone who, rapes an intimate partner would only rape an intimate partner or stranger. But what we're finding actually is there's a much greater diversity of who they rape and how they rape. Instead, they're really a rapist who will exploit vulnerabilities or try to set up those vulnerabilities to exploit someone, as compared to like having a type, because it's not about sex, it's about power and control.
Even more disturbing about Donnie is that he tells me he leads a counseling group for other people who have love addictions, sexual addictions, who have issues, some of which relate to online activity like this. So he's not just in a counseling group at like the city center where he lives in Indiana. He told me he goes into jails and has meetings, like an AA for sex addicts, in prisons with inmates. Now here's a guy who's doing this and counseling at-risk people, and he's out there doing this. How do you square that? How do you explain that in a guy like Donnie?
It may be that he likes hearing and talking and sort of keeping that at the forefront of his behavior, and so it isn't unique to have once offenders are able to get past the stigma of being able to admit to being an addict or being convicted of a sexual offense, then it's not that rare for them to also form social groups around that and be able to find solace with, being around other people who they, also share that stigma. But sometimes you will also see that they're sharing tips for each other. They're sharing, they're getting, sexual arousal from being able to hear other people's stories. And so in that case, it may just be a way for him to continue to live out certain fantasies he has or fantasies he would like to have by continuing to be involved in that group and that not really getting the support that he needs from that.
It would seem to be an extreme example, somebody who is trying to live out this fantasy of meeting a 13-year-old through that girl's father. But he sits on the couch and is very casual, very comfortable, ogling this girl who's really a sheriff's deputy, thank God. But if it wasn't a sting operation and there was such a scenario, and people do this with their kids, sadly, we know this, from different cases, whether it's for child pornography or something else, there's going to be an offense here. What goes through your mind when you see him sitting on the couch like that, talking so calmly, so matter-of-factly about this?
I've read some really interesting books from psychologists who do therapy with sex offenders, which actually has some of the highest burnout rates for psychologists is working with sex offenders because treatment is so difficult and because of what they have to listen to and hear. But what's interesting is that a lot of psychologists will say that sex offenders can sometimes be the most charming, the most calm, right? Because they're the ones who are able to be successful in like luring people in that sort of way. That if you presented as the, you know, like a unhinged person or the crazy monster that we want to think that sex offenders are, then you wouldn't be able to, you know, like lure people in to be able to exploit them or to, you know, use ruses and, you know, those kinds of things. So actually, a lot of psychologists say that sex offenders can be quite charming and you know, like calm, collected, those kinds of things that we don't really, you know, we think about them as like, you know, people, you know, who have kittens in the basement or some aspect, but instead, right, like they're the person next door.
Donnie does not come off to me as the first-time offender here. He seems pretty confident and comfortable.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And not too worried about like repercussions.
I mean, even knowing that he's going to be on television,
Yeah.
even knowing that he's going to be criminally prosecuted, he's still going to spin his story. Talk about grooming and how these predators find ways to break down the barriers we have in society between adults and children. You know, when I was growing up, people would say, don't talk to strangers. Good advice then, good advice today.
Yeah.
The problem, of course, is the stranger on Wednesday is so adept at grooming your child, he's not a stranger by Friday.
Right. And so, like what we've learned a lot from the scandals in the Catholic Church, the Boy Scouts of America, these kind, you know, you name it, those kinds of sexual scandals that you can see, is that those individuals situate themselves to be in positions to be able to have access to those individuals. So especially for kids, you're much more likely the child is much more likely to be sexually assaulted by somebody they know versus someone they don't. It's true with adults, but more so with kids, because kids aren't around strangers to a large extent, right? They're around people that they know. So that's why I think it's really important to sort of teach kids that, you know, it's not just the strangers that might be able to hurt you, but these other, you know, like, but people who you do know, who you do love, who those kinds of things that can often, you know, commit those kinds of offenses for you. So really a lot of training for lots of kids as well as adults around identifying that behavior. But you can see that he is quite calm, that he's trying to talk his way out of that situation. So you wonder how well he is able to talk himself into a lot of grooming situations where they are able to spot those individuals who, how many other kids did they talk to online, right? Before they found the one that was like, that
Said yes.
Yeah, said yes, that admit those sort of vulnerabilities that they're like, oh, here's the one, right? They just keep trying until they can get that, until they can get it really well in terms of like that vulnerable, the most vulnerable of that.
Let's hear from some of the people who are watching us tonight in this special edition of Takedown Live. Sean, what are you hearing from the people at home?
Well, Chris, I'm seeing quite a bit of chat here. I'm going to read you a few questions. Hey, Chris, since the episode of Charles Lawrence, since you both used to ride the train together, have you seen him since, or has he ever reached out? Also, you know, any updates on Jeff Sokol?
Charles Lawrence surfaced in our Fairfield, Connecticut investigation, and it was so bizarre because he showed up for a decoy posing as a 13-year-old boy. When I went out to confront him, he looked at me, he said, "No, Chris, no, it's not what you think," and took off. Now, I didn't initially recognize him, but it turned out to be somebody who I knew, not well, but who I knew from the commuter train between New York City and Connecticut. And when I figured that out, it was like, oh my God, you know, it's stunning that somebody you could have been with in a cafe car, who was kind of on the periphery of your group or your friends, would end up in this situation. And he said to the detectives later, because he didn't stay to talk to me, he said, well, I didn't have my glasses on. I thought it was 18. And the detective said, well, you didn't have your glasses on. You found the address okay and showed up at the house. And he had brought, you know, male porn and some other things with him. Did I ever hear from him again? I did reach out to Charles Lawrence to ask him to do an interview. He said he would consider it. Then I never heard from him again. And of course, like all these things, once somebody surfaces in an investigation like this, then suddenly stories are all over the place saying this or that or something else. But he did like 2 years in prison. And all those guys did in Connecticut. They faced a lot of time. Jeff Sokol, who was another predator who surfaced in the Fairfield investigation, also served time in prison. He showed up with the pizza, and he was the famous pizza predator who ate the pizza during the interview I had with him and then offered me the pizza and offered the crew the pizza. He showed up for a 13-year-old girl. He drove all the way from Boston to Fairfield and had a marriage contract in his car. Like, that would make it okay. And I've reached out to Jeff Sokol, too, to do an interview. And he had tried to change his name in court. And the judge wouldn't allow him to change his name, nor would he allow the hearing to be made private. So he's still Jeff Sokol. He's still out there. As far as we know, neither Sokol nor Lawrence have been in trouble anytime since the arrest. Sean?
Chris, we have another question from Cal Travels. Chris, who decides if you interview a predator before or after the police? And we get this question quite a bit.
We do, and it's a good question. It quite honestly depends on the jurisdiction in which we're collaborating with authorities. And it also depends on the potential danger, the assessment of is this guy dangerous or not. Obviously, there are benefits to doing both. There are benefits to interview the predator before authorities, detectives do their interview, and there's some benefit to doing it afterwards. And it just depends on, where we are. Some departments like to assess the situation, get it under control, and then I can ask my questions. If we sense that I can do it in a safe manner and have the discussion first, we do it that way. So it just depends on the department, the jurisdiction, and the place where we're working. But I could make an argument for doing it either way, quite honestly. They both work well. And sometimes when I get to do the interview after they're put in custody, they relax, they give it up. They're more apt in some cases to tell me the whole story, whether they're making it up and trying to defend their actions or they're being honest. And in fact, that was the case with Matthew Bongine, the fanboy. He told detectives, I'm not talking, and he saw me walk in, and he told me everything. He was excited, and it was quite something to see. Sean?
Chris, we're heading back to you for the next clip.
We talk about guys deflecting and saying, I've never done this before. I was only here to make sure the girl was okay. I was going to talk to her. I was going to give her guidance. I've heard that over and over again. And then every once in a while, we get a guy who tells us at least part of the truth. And that was the case with a guy named Brian, who also surfaced in our Ohio investigation. And this guy drove all the way from the Chicago area to the Dayton, Ohio area with a backpack that contained condoms, lubricant, spermicide, vape pen, and Plan B pills after a sexually charged conversation with a teenage girl. Let's take a look at the clip.
Oh my goodness. I had a conversation with someone about you.
You did? Why so many things like this?
Why so many what?
So many items like this. Condoms, spermicide, lubricant, Plan B pills.
Well, because if you're going to be with anybody,
Right.
you should protect yourself and or the other person from an unwanted pregnancy.
But you admitted having sex with other underage girls, one in Michigan and another in Ohio, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Did you go to their parents' homes, or where did you have sex with them? You went to their home like this, right? You had sex in the car, you had sex in the house, you had sex, where did you have sex with them?
Sorry, this is kind of surreal.
Well, it's a little bit surreal for me, to be honest with you. Have you ever sought help?
Actually, recently, yes, I've been thinking about going to counseling, and not necessarily just because of this, but just in general. Yes, sir.
You see why this is a problem.
Oh, it's huge. Yeah. No, it is. Yeah.
It's a problem, all right.
It's a problem.
How do you even start with somebody like that? I mean, here's a guy who literally spent 4 to 5 hours in a car, and after he's taken into custody is concerned because, well, he's got to get back to work the next day. Didn't you think about that when you had this sexually charged conversation with somebody you thought was a teenage girl and you were coming to rape her? I mean, and then this guy admits, doctor, that he had met at least 2 other teenage girls online and had had sex with them. And he's wearing a necklace, a friendship necklace, with half a medallion, and admits to me that a girl he raped has the other necklace with the other half of the medallion. He's obviously groomed her to think that this was more than just a sexual assault. It was some sort of relationship. I was so stunned when he told me that. It was shocking. So if he admits he's done this twice before, what is the reality here?
The reality is that, especially with the sexual assault kits, which is connecting individuals by DNA, so it's a more objective way of looking at this, we're really seeing a lot more sexual offending than, than what a criminal history would indicate. So it's showing some of these individuals, he's admitting it to you, but, how many other times would he be able to really, admit that or talk to people about that? And the part of like, oh, I've been thinking about counseling for other things, not just, not this, where he's not really, again, taking responsibility, showing remorse, showing as if they've done anything wrong. And I think part of that is just this inability to really take on the label of a rapist or sex offender and really deflecting all of that onto others. And so part of that is grooming, of picking individuals, young, in this case, young girls, who might be in need of love, attention, those other types of things. But really, at the end of the day, he's a rapist, right? Not necessarily someone who might be lonely or looking for this. Those things might be the case, but there's lots of lonely individuals who don't choose to act like he did.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, if he's admitted to me 2 other instances of having sex with teenage girls, what do you think the reality is?
There's some research that suggests there's on average 7 a year until an individual is caught, which is on average
7 a year.
7 a year. There's a lot of variation in that. Like the study showed, there was a lot of variation in the number of that, but on average 7 a year. Until they get caught, which is, I think, on average about 4 years before. So there could be upwards of 30. And we do see internet being used. I think you were ahead of your time in the To Catch a Predator, being able to really show how the internet was facilitating these. There's a lot of really scary research showing about how dating apps and other types of internet things are also continuing. People just don't go and meet individuals in the same sort of way. They're using internet apps and other sorts of things to do that. And part of that is an increased risk as well for sexual assault for adults as well as kids still. So I think when you continue that there could be average of 30 or more, and those might just be the ones, that they're admitting to, that they're talking about, those kinds of things.
What's the difference between a guy who just stone cold denies that he was going to have sex with a child and somebody who says, well, I did it twice before? It's a different profile. I mean, same predatory activity,
right.
Same danger, but why does one guy admit it or give a little bit away, and why does one guy just say, I'm just here to talk to the girl, counsel her?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know that there's been, I can't think of any research that I've read that would suggest like why one person would, the only stuff I've seen are when the researchers will come in and say, like, it's outside of the statute, we can't prosecute you. Now will you tell us? And then they go back and kind of check records and check for reports and other sorts of things to try to match up certain aspects of the cases. But it's usually when they can't get caught. And in this case, it seems like he's admitting it too, but somehow thinks that maybe he wouldn't get in trouble for
Well, it
those.
seems to
wouldn't
me
get caught.
sometimes they think, well, this girl said it was okay. You know, and not coming to the realization, the truth that this girl can't give you consent because of her age. And people should know that.
Right, yeah.
Our society.
And I think they, they do know that. They know that a 13-year-old is not an adult, right? Like, I mean, and so, so, maybe they tell themselves, I think that's a part of it, right? They have to admit and define for themselves that this was not a consent, that it was a rape, it wasn't a consensual act. I did that. And a lot of individuals, I think, just can't get there.
And here again with Brian, you've got a situation where he brings up divorce, but then admits he's got children, including a daughter who's about the same age as the girl he was going to assault that evening.
It is really shocking to hear that, because it doesn't make a lot of sense, because I think for an individual who can empathize, who can say, I wouldn't want someone to do that to my daughter, and some of them may have even,
And they'd say
that.
I mean, I've had guys literally say, including Brian, I'd be upset. I would beat the hell out of the guy. Well, then why are you here?
Right, because they rationalize that behavior away, or they're like, but no, this is different because she really is interested, and I need to show her how to have sex, or need to teach her all those sorts of things, which is really just about power, right? It's about, here's someone who can't fight back, who can't make as many, can't make adult decisions, and it's really about emasculated men being able to often express that in ways. Domination and power.
Sean has some questions in the studio next door. Sean? Hey, Chris, got several questions. I'll give you the first one. Were there any predators that you chose not to interview? If so, why?
Just about everybody gets interviewed. Sometimes they leave, they don't talk to me, they clam up for whatever combination of reasons. Sometimes they say a few words, and that's it. We had a recent case, and this came about from the podcast. I do a podcast called Predators I've Caught, where I go back into previous cases, and I delve into the transcripts and immerse myself in the interviews and try to figure out where these guys are today. Excuse me. And I got a letter, an email. I encourage people to write in, like we're doing tonight with these predator investigations, and a young woman told the story of how when she was in college in about 2015, she was watching To Catch a Predator investigations online. And she saw a guy who looked very familiar. And it turns out that this guy, arrested in 2006 in Riverside County, California, at the age of 19, in 2009, at the age of 23, posed as a teenager to meet this girl who was a teenager online, and they had a sexual relationship. She said yes, it was consensual, but it was illegal, obviously, because he was 23 and she was only 16. And she was shocked to figure out that this guy was, at the time they met, a convicted sex offender who had served a year in prison, was on probation, and was registered as a sex offender. And she's thinking it's this other teenage guy with whom, at a very vulnerable state in her life, was having a relationship. And again, there's nothing on his criminal record indicating that he's offended, but we know he has because this woman came forward. And we actually did an interview with her for the podcast, and it's very revealing. And it shows, to your point, Doctor, that these guys don't often stop until they're caught. And even after they're caught, they go back out and reoffend.
Right.
How often is there data on reoffending?
Yeah, so the data on at least, okay, so in terms, well, I'll distinguish. We often talk about recidivism, right? Getting caught and then getting caught again as just the behavior. How often did you reoffend? But that's only getting caught and getting caught. There is, we have data as well as some, the folks in Wayne County, which is Detroit, who also tested lots of rape kits. So once you combine the rape kits with their criminal histories, it's upwards of 40%. Whereas if you were just looking at did they get caught for a sex offense and then did they get caught again, it's about 5 to 8%, depending on how long of a time period you observe them. So much higher rates. And still, though, rape kits aren't all rapes. That doesn't include rapes that aren't reported, where even if they are reported, victims don't get kits. And, if there's DNA within the kits, then that, if there's not, then it wouldn't link to other kits. And so we still have a more limited view, but it's a better view than just looking at someone's criminal history to determine whether they're a sexual offender or not.
Darkly fascinating. Sean, what else are people saying tonight?
Chris, we got a pretty common question here. Are you allowed to talk to predators or alleged predators after they request a lawyer?
I can. The law is much more strict when it comes to detectives. So if a alleged predator says to a detective, I want a lawyer, I don't want to speak to you anymore, that's it. The interview is over. But if I am on the scene and they want to talk to me, there's nothing to preclude me from asking questions. Now, at some point, it becomes clear that they don't want to talk, and I'll, let them go on their way. But it's interesting because even after they say no to the detective, in many more cases they'll say yes to me, and it's so odd because they're struck by a sort of celebrity, and it's almost in these cases like some of the alleged predators say, "Okay, I've been busted. Now it's time to talk to Chris." Like it's part of the routine, and it's accepted in terms of what they do next. And they often do talk. Sean?
Chris, the next question we have is, and we get this quite a bit. Can anyone end up okay? Can anyone go back to being normal?
After being victimized or after committing a crime?
No, after committing a crime.
I think that's a better question for the doctor here. I have seen cases, and I've talked to therapists about rehabilitation. And I know you're a criminologist, not a therapist, but I'm sure you have some interesting insights into this. It seems to me that this is an under-serviced community, that in the cases where a guy potentially could be rehabilitated, say they're reached at a young age, it's not a very, glorified path of medicine. If you have $250,000 in medical school debt and you have the choice of becoming a plastic surgeon or going into federal prisons as a psychiatrist and interviewing sex offenders, what are you going to do? And there are fortunately dedicated people who do that work, and psychotherapists who have dedicated practices to helping kids get back on track. But there very much is a lack of treatment here, I think.
Yeah, certainly there's a lack of treatment, and often that treatment comes through the criminal justice system. So it's forced, through a conviction or other sorts of things. And we know that treatment works best when an individual is ready and, willingly wanting to get better and participate as part of the treatment. So sometimes individuals, there's a difference, right? Some individuals will go through treatment because they're mandated by the court to go through treatment, or they have to as part of their prison sentence or their sex offender registry or management. For those individuals, you could still have some services for that, but it's difficult. Some places have what they call, like Washington has like a sex offender island, where they have people who are civilly committed who admit to not being able to ever get treatment. And so they serve sentences and then get put onto this sort of contained facility, this sex offender island, where they live out the rest of their days so they aren't able to harm other individuals, or at least not individuals outside of the prison. There is some treatment. I think treatment does work. It's very difficult, and it's difficult with older, again, juveniles, it's a little easier and there's better treatment. For adults, it takes a lot of work also to deal with, trauma that they experience as kids, which often, especially for male offenders, there's often an even more extensive history of trauma. So they have to work through their own, trauma that they experienced as a kid and deal with those sorts of things, in addition to the sex offense and other sorts of things, as well as things like developing empathy, like we talked about before, or an impulse control. Those kinds of things are very difficult to treat away, but there are some can get better, especially for those that are the less, all rape is violent, but they're of the less of the violent components of rape.
I talked to a therapist once at a event, fundraiser, to raise money for children who are victims of this sort of thing. And they talked about a case where they reached a child early, 15, 16. And after hearing the story, I truly believe that had they not had this intensive therapy, this kid would have gone to college and been that rough football player who committed the date rape. And because he was treated, he became this empathetic kid who understood he was going down the wrong path. And he was from a good family, but his behavior, and fortunately the family identified this and got him into therapy. They saved him, and they saved a victim. And I've gotten a letter from a guy who is a longtime viewer of the predator investigations, who was very honest and said, look, I have an attraction to younger girls, inappropriately younger girls, but I get treatment for it. I have an appropriately aged girlfriend who doesn't really know my struggle, but my therapist does, and I avoid situations where I'm one-on-one with girls that age. So far, I've not offended. Watching your show has helped me to not offend. I don't know if it's always a deterrent based upon what I see in these investigations, but we hope that it is a deterrent in some respects. Sean, you have a couple more questions.
I think so. We've got one from Nathan Backus. It just came in. Just so you know, we're live. Hey, Chris, how many more predator investigations do you think you'll do throughout your career? I'm hoping north of 100. So Nathan clearly doesn't know how many you've done. That's okay, Nathan. It's okay. But there have been, I think, nearly 500.
Yeah, are you keeping a running
500
tally?
cases. Yeah, I think we're around 500, maybe a little bit more of individuals who have surfaced in our investigations, and many more who've surfaced and didn't show up for whatever combination of reasons. I don't see us stopping anytime soon. I sometimes half-jokingly say to Sean Reck, I wouldn't mind doing a cooking show in Italy, and if we can clean up this crime problem in America, because we do a lot of other stories and documentaries involving criminal activity besides the traditional predator investigations. But I don't see it going away. When you consider that in the very beginning, 19 years ago, we merely had decoys in chat rooms on AOL and Yahoo, and today there's been an explosion, as you know, Doctor, in the number of social media platforms upon which adults can reach out to children. And during the pandemic, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children would suggest that these contacts rose as high as 900% because there was more activity, more opportunity for adults to approach children. And I want to get into a case that surfaced for us in Polk County, Florida. And people talk about this Romeo and Juliet excuse. Should a case where an 18-year-old who preys upon a 15-year-old be pursued the same way as a 28-year-old and a 15 or 14-year-old? And we had a case in Polk County, and the guy was a registered sex offender, as it turned out. And I want to play the clip, and then we'll talk about it. But this is a guy who his name is Sam.
This alleged predator comes to meet with a 15-year-old girl and stupidly tries to make a run for it.
Hey! What's going on?
trying to run.
When I interview him, he reveals shocking details about his past.
How many times have you had sex with underage girls?
This is the one I was controlling.
Sam wants to ask me a question, but he's not going to like my answer.
Can I ask you, like, about yourself?
Sure, you can ask me.
What do you do for your work?
What do I do for work? I'm Chris Hansen,
Okay, I understand.
and I do stories on,
Oh, okay, yes, I understand.
on men who try to meet children online for sex. And so that's what we're doing here.
Yeah, I understand.
And what happened up in Michigan?
When I was a senior in high school, I was dating a freshman, and we ended up having sex.
So it was a situation where you were a senior in high school dating a freshman.
Yes, sir.
And did somebody have an issue with that? Her parents or family? Or
Well, after we broke up, she went, and her friends convinced her to go to the police and tell them, which I understand.
in how much trouble did you get in up there, Sam?
3 years probation, and then I messed that up 2 years in, and then I had to do 18 months in prison.
18 months in prison. Which prison did you go to, Sam?
It was Jackson.
Now, having been a reporter for years in Michigan, I know some of the ground he was talking about. So he was charged in Saginaw County, mid-Michigan, with sexual assault because he was 18, the girl was 15. Now, you could see it was a dating situation there, right? Inappropriate, and he admitted to me later in the interview that he messed up this girl's life by initiating this relationship. But you could see why he got probation for that offense. But then he violates probation. He goes to Jackson prison, a tough prison, for 18 months, comes out, moves from Michigan to Florida. He's living in St. Petersburg, selling supplements online. And now he travels halfway across the state to meet a teenage girl for sex, knowing that he is, at that moment, a registered sex offender. And he gets arrested. The scenario was that this girl was supposed to be at Grandma and Grandpa's, home in a, mobile home park. And he knows he's in trouble. So he tries to run not once, but twice. And that's why you see his face all scraped up there. And he knew he was in trouble. And now he's going away for a long, long time. You would think that having been in Jackson prison for 18 months would have been enough of a deterrent for him not to reoffend. And when I asked him why he wasn't with an age-appropriate woman or trying to be with one, he said, well, none of them were available, or none of them interested me, or I didn't like the way they looked. Give me the profile of somebody like that as a criminologist.
It's hard to sort of get, sometimes I think because we think so rationally, it is hard to get into the mind of someone who would be like, you're already in trouble once, you know that this is wrong, you can try to have a relationship with someone who's an appropriate age. And I'm not for sure the age of consent in Florida either, but it's probably around 15 or 16, probably.
It's 16 if you're, with somebody who's within 2 years of that, I believe.
So, he didn't even necessarily need to go, he was purposely then trying to maybe recreate what he had in that prior relationship or continue to go back to the feelings that he had in that prior relationship. It's really sometimes hard to see because, again, they rationalize away so much of their behavior and try to, put a nice little bow on it to deflect. But I think, again, it shows the course of conduct type of thing. This is someone who is repeatedly committing these types of offenses. It's not just, here's this girl I went to high school with, she was the love of my life, we also just happened to fall in love, and we had sex because, it wasn't that. Here he's then going out and continuing to do this, which really indicates his sexual proclivities to rape as compared to, trying to establish a relationship with actually somebody.
Some of the comments I get are, God, these guys are stupid. How could they not know this? They're not stupid, though. They can't control the urge.
I've seen lots of stupid, what I would consider very brazen, very stupid behavior on the fault on the side of rapists. We see in our case files rapists who give the victims their phone, stranger, like, here's my phone number, give, like after a terrible gang rape, here's my phone number, please call me later. Here's my address. Here's my card. Go tell the police officer, because I know you're going to report this. Here, tell them it's me who raped you. So I think that idea that that there's, that they're the criminal masterminds is not necessarily the case. And in this case, they even say, maybe this is a sting. Maybe I'm going to get this, and still they are hoping maybe that they get away with it. But I've seen some really stupid behavior on the part of rapists.
You mentioned something earlier that I think is interesting. In some respects, these guys are gambling. That's their mentality.
Yeah. Rolling the dice to see what are the odds that I would get caught this time, or the victim won't be believed.
Do you find in your research that there's one part of the country where this is more prevalent? I think it happens everywhere.
No, I think that it's not necessarily regional, but more about, we see this as well as a lot in human trafficking cases. Oftentimes people will ask me, because I also look at human trafficking, how does someone find themselves as a victim of human trafficking? And I had a prosecutor once explain to me, it's like, if you can think about a time in your life where you were at your most vulnerable for whatever reason, right? It could be drugs, it could be family situations, it could be all kinds of things, and you're just at your very most vulnerable. And I think that's what the perpetrators are looking for. So it could be anywhere in the United States, but really they're trying to find the individuals who are at their most vulnerable point in their life. And they may go through try to meet a bunch of different people who may not be at that vulnerable point, but at some point they do find one. And so I don't think that there's necessarily, and they're coming from all over, right? And you've been probably all over the United States.
There's no difference.
Right.
You could be in Michigan, you could be in California, you could be in Texas, you could be in Florida. It happens everywhere.
Right.
The only thing that I can say is that you'll see, if you're near a military base, you'll see military guys. If you're near, Disney World, you'll see some Disney employees. You'll see somebody from all walks of life, including, most recently, we saw a doctor, a 61-year-old doctor, who during his course of seeing patients, 18 patients in one day, he's chatting with a teenage girl and sending pictures of his genitalia in the midst of seeing all these patients.
With everything to lose.
Everything to lose.
Right.
No, everything to lose.
Yeah.
Everything to lose.
Yeah.
Let's go to Sean for one more question, then I want to go over some things that maybe parents would like to hear from somebody who, has a criminology background like you. Sean?
Hey, Chris. This is a question we get quite a bit, and it's a tough one for us to answer. They say, how many people exit the conversations after they find out they're talking to a minor? And this is really a question for the decoys, for the agencies we work with, because we don't operate like the old Catch a Predator show where we're using an independent agency. We're actually working with law enforcement. So how would you answer that? How do we exit these conversations?
It's a great question, Sean. And I would think, based upon my experience, that it's probably 50% of the people, and they may not have altruistic reasons, but 50% of the potential predators who get into a conversation with a decoy leave after they say the age. So ASL, age, sex, location, 12, 13, 14. This is inappropriate, it's wrong, bye. Or tell Chris Hansen I said hello, or tell Sheriff Chris Swanson I said hello, and they leave. But 50% at least, in my experience, will continue the conversation, and they'll say, no, you wouldn't want an old guy like me anyway. Have you been with a guy? Have you done anything? Have you have a boyfriend? And then you see them turn this corner and start to incrementally try to groom this child for sex. As a criminologist who's studied this from rape kits all the way through to other criminal behavior, if you could give parents three things, and I have my speech on this in terms of creating awareness and an open dialogue, whether it's this or sextortion that we see is such a huge epidemic across the country. What do you say to parents to help them keep their kids safe online?
Well, I will first off by saying I have 2 daughters.
Right.
One is 12 and one is 9.
So they're right in in there.
And so I have obviously thought about this not only as a parent, but as someone who studies sexual abuse. That I think the number one thing that they can do is to have difficult conversations with your children about the fact that this can happen. I remember the first time my daughter realizing what I studied and was able to read what I was studying and was like, what does this mean? What is this thing? What is rape? What is sexual assault, right? And having to tell a 6 or 7-year-old in an age-appropriate way, those kinds of things was a very kind of sad day for me that I had to explain to my daughters.
The end of innocence in some respects,
that this
right?
is right. But on the flip side of that, my daughters are very aware and we talk openly about their bodies, about what is appropriate and not appropriate, that they have a right to their own bodies, that, no one has the right. All those conversations about consent are very important. And there is a blurry line between consent, not consent in early relationships, and then later on, sort of pushing boundaries, right? You just talked about those men are constantly pushing boundaries. So sort of having that open dialogue, I think, is the number one thing of correct body part names, talking very openly, being able to not ignore the fact that this does happen, and you want to equip your children with the words and the language to be able to talk about this, so that if something does feel inappropriate, they can talk to you about those sorts of things of is this okay? Is this not okay? Let's talk about this, those types of things. And then I think obviously internet stuff, they're way smarter than us in terms of internet ability, but the criminologists would say lack of capable guardianship is that a motivated offender, a suitable target, and a lack of capable guardianship. And so when there's no guardianship for that, then there's opportunities for exploitation. What would be yours?
I think that it starts with the moment your child is online. It has access to the internet. And I think you have to start with a discussion that runs along the lines of, look, there are adults out there who are not like your mom and dad. They like to trick kids, and kids don't like to be tricked. And so don't let anybody trick you. And one of the most striking things, Rachel, that I witnessed in this entire 19 years of going after predators is early on in these investigations, I had a group of middle schoolers who are probably, now 23, 24, 25 years old. And one of my producers put them all together. And I said to them, how many of you have been approached by an adult online and it's made you feel uncomfortable? They approached you in an inappropriate way. They all raised their hands. And I said, how many of you told your parents? And they're looking down at their feet, kicking their feet, and 1 or 2 raised their hands. I said, why didn't you tell your parents? We're afraid they were going to take away the internet. And I think you see the same thing with sextortion, where these kids get taken advantage of when they're in a vulnerable state, 15, 16 years old, their minds aren't fully formed, and they think that they've given pictures of themselves, intimate pictures, sexually explicit pictures, to somebody who's going to spread it all over the internet. And these bad guys in West Africa, half a world away, try to extort them. And these kids are committing suicide.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to tell their parents. The parents would be just fine with it and say, look, your grandma's not going to see this. But kids are so attached to their online persona, their digital being, that they're afraid of what's going to happen. And I think as a society, we need to collectively, as parents, and my kids are grown now, but as parents of children at that age, need to say, look, you can come talk to me. We'll solve this together. And I think it starts there.
Yeah. Or did you see did you see something that made you feel weird?
Yeah.
What did you?
It's almost like you have to be proactive as a
Right.
parent. And look, you're right in it.
Yeah, I'm right
My
in
guys
it.
are 31 and 29 and 23 and 21, so I'm out of the danger zone for the most part. But you're right in the thick of it.
Right.
12 and 9.
And ways that, while I think of myself as still, pretty, like not completely, not like my dad in terms of technology, right? So but
I can't stop the VCR from blinking.
right, yes.
That's how old I am.
He doesn't know yet. I can get most of the things, but things that you don't sometimes want to tell your kids. But I've had the conversations with my daughters about, once they were like having slumber parties and girls were texting downstairs. It was like, maybe I need to talk to my daughter about about getting pictures from somebody, getting don't send any, don't receive, if you receive anything, if your friends try to do that, having those conversations even as young as junior high seems weird, but it's not, because those things, they're going to experience it, they're going to talk about those things. You want to at least have the ability for them to talk to you about it and explain some of those in a way that their friends won't be able to do, or they'll be too ashamed, and then they might be in situations they don't know how to get out of.
Or you want to be the one your kids go to so they don't go to someone else.
Right. So what happens if, my daughter gets a pic of, a pic of someone, she didn't ask for, okay, come and tell me, we can talk about it, we can deal with it. I'm not going to take away your phone. You're not necessarily in trouble, right? Like, we deal with that situation as it hasn't happened, but we would deal with that as it comes. And so, if it's something like To Catch a Predator, other sorts of things, there are these situations where this is happening. How do you get yourself out of this situation? Where do you go for help? Who can help you? If your friends are in those kinds of situations, please tell me about your friends, because I also need to know that. Their parents need to know that. Those kinds of conversations are really important.
There's a fine line between, demystifying some of this stuff in terms of the open dialogue a parent has with a child and creating fear. And you don't want to steal their innocence.
No,
at least I think. And again, you're in the thick of it, so you probably know better than I do. But it's not easy. But there are assets out there, and I think really at the end of the day, it's just saying, I'm here. I heard a story today about this happening to a kid. I hope it's not happening to you. And if it does, I'm not going to punish you. I had one rule with my kids, which is, if you come to me, no matter what happens, we'll figure this out together. And for the most part, through those tumultuous 15 to 18 years, it worked out well. I can't thank you enough for being here. And I have one final question for you in a second here, but I want to go back to Sean Reck one more time. Sean, tell the folks about the very latest and what they can do to help out at True Blue.
I'll tell you what, Chris, the questions tonight, again, earned $265, and that's going to Cleveland Missing. So YouTubers, you're awesome. You're helping a fantastic organization that is helping families who don't know what to do when their child goes missing. So you're making a real difference, and we really, really appreciate that. So thanks again for paying, sponsoring questions. We answered some questions that were sponsored. We answered a few that were not, but we really appreciate you. Thanks for doing that. The other thing is, remember, we're going to open our store, True Blue Swag, SWAG. It's not open yet, okay, but you're going to be able to buy our shirts. You're going to be able to buy, we're going to actually add some more merchandise eventually. We don't think we're a fashion brand, but we think that some of you may want to support us and may want to get the message out about True Blue so we get more subscribers, because billions of people like predator investigations, and a lot of people don't know about takedown investigations. So if you can tell your friends about us, we really appreciate it. And thanks for joining us for another live show. I'm going to send it back to Chris.
Dr. Rachel Lovell, thank you so much for being with us. Any final thoughts tonight that you want to share with people, just in general, about understanding the mind of a predator and not becoming victims themselves?
I think that I would say that I appreciate people who are willing to struggle with and work to try to understand this and not sort of push it inside and say, this is so terrible, I don't want to think about it, I don't want this to even be a part of my life, because I think wrestling with our views on sexual assault and how we view victims it is happening. It happens to a lot of individuals. And so really working to try to understand these kinds of things, I think, as well as show support and for survivors. Always, get the training that you need to be able to do a trauma-informed response to disclosure. For example, if someone tells you that they've been sexually assaulted, there are many resources out there to how to give a response that's trauma-informed so that you don't, continue to harm them in that sort of way and help them get the resources that they need.
Dr. Rachel Lovell of the Center for Criminology Research at Cleveland State, thank you very much. Thanks for your insight. It was a pleasure to be here. You all should know that we have many more Takedown episodes headed your way. They're in editing now. We're going to continue to produce those episodes, and I'll continue to stay on it, as we all will here at True Blue. We've got a number of other very compelling documentaries coming out on sextortion and so many other topics, and those are all in the pipeline, all going to be out there on True Blue very soon. So thank you for coming out tonight and watching and interacting with us. We're going to be doing another live show before too long, and we're going to have one of the sheriffs with whom we work, Chris Swanson, and just the other day we got a commitment from one of the defense lawyers who represents a lot of the predators I've caught, who's agreed to come on and talk to us live. So that'll be fascinating as well. But until then, check out True Blue, as you know, TRUBLU, watch trueblue.com, my podcast, Predators I've Caught, available on all platforms. Thank you again for all your support. We could not be more pleased with the way things are going at True Blue, and thank you very much, and there's more to come. I'll be watching and listening. Have a good night.